are here. Hopefully, we won't wait too long. We don't even know how long that was going. We got lost in a conversation, a fun conversation about feelings. All right, welcome tonight, Tuesday night podcast. We're back for our normal, not your ordinary podcast, and tonight we're going to be talking about friends. I was going to call this "Choosing Your Friends Carefully," and so, but that was just kind of long, so I chose "How Many Friends Do You Really Have" instead, because that was short. But I want to talk about choosing friends and what real friends really look like. And so I guess just to kind of build the case a little bit in way of intro, when I was thinking about this subject, we were talking about the kind of inspiration was talking about, we were talking about prayer and having like things you're going through, things you're facing, whatever, and having people you actually talk to that you know will help pray through things and give you advice that is sound and, you know, wise. And I don't want this to just be like a you know, church people only podcast, but you know, it's mainly about you know, giving a very clear definition of what friendship is, what real friendship is. And so knowing what friendship is not, knowing what friendship maybe looks like in the world, how does that differ from friendship within the church, and how does God see friendship? And so as I started like working through all these questions in my mind, I started thinking about scriptures like when the Bible says Abraham was called a friend of God, and then rolling into the New Testament, thinking about Jesus telling the disciples, "I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends." And there are these statements that are made. And I was just thinking about how God chooses friends, because you don't hear that very often in Scripture. You don't hear God saying, "That's my friend," and "This is my friend," and "That's my friend." But you see these little moments where somebody is a certain way or is a certain type of person, and God says, "That's my friend." And it's interesting to note that when Jesus tells the disciples, "I no longer call you servants, but friends," Judas was not in that group. And so, but again, you go back to Jesus choosing the disciples. He says, "Have I not chosen you, the 12, and one of you's a devil?" And so you have like these connections of people with God, people who are connected with God, but are connected maybe on a servant level, or connected maybe on a believer, you know, head knowledge relationship to Jesus. They don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, but they do believe that he exists. And so I guess in way of the first question is, how does God see friends? And is that the same way man sees friends?
Well, when I think about the idea of God in general, God is a personal God, but I think as I've thought a lot about this subject recently, actually, the whole idea of, you know, just from general relationships, relationship with God, relationship with one another, relationship in terms of hierarchy, which is something that I'm going to be talking about in a future podcast or future sermon. But the idea of being a friend is a mutual respect for the position in life of both of those people. Without that, you can't have a friendship. Give
me some clarity on that.
Okay.
What do you mean by that?
Okay. That each to be somebody else's friend, you have to let them be who they are. You know, and that I think is the most important element of friendship, is that if the only basis by which anybody can be friends with you is according to your criteria, then you won't ever really have any friends. You may know people, but you'll be like those shallow high school girls who get together, you know, and say, "We're not going to be friends with this person, you know, we're just going to be friends together." And so you'll have these kind of groupie, mindless people that will be around you and will be cool with your selfish focus. And they'll be okay with that because you have something to offer, but they'll just be taking you for a ride. They won't actually be your friends. And so true friendship can only exist within the context of a mutual respect, one towards the other,
Yeah.
both directions. And so the idea of position, the reason why I say that is because you can only have, God, okay, so give some examples of this. God is not the man upstairs. And that you hear people say that, say the man upstairs. Well, they may think that God is their friend, but God isn't their friend. And God doesn't see them as a friend because they don't have any respect for who he is, And so when you look at relationships, friendships, if that's the way that you feel about people is you define the terms, then you don't have friends. Because it's the mutual friendship that defines the terms, and there's nothing more rewarding than learning how to do that. So some of the closest relationships that I have with people, it's interesting. And in a moment, there have been times where people who I have known for many, 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 many years, and they're normally very careful of what they say to other people. Or even what they say to me, and then there would just be these moments of full disclosure. And the reason for that is because they know that I respect them, and they know that I will respect their privacy. So they'll say, you know what, nobody knows about this or whatever, and they'll explain things because they know I'm not going to go around and tell other people about it. And so there's a very powerful thing there. That in true friendships is that mutual respect and respecting people for their position in life as well. So if they're above you, like God is above us, and so when Jesus says, I call you friends, he's not saying they're buddies. They're not just fishing buddies. Yeah. Now you can call me and talk to me and tell me whatever you want. You can just treat me like one of the guys. That never even entered into the idea of Jesus saying, you're my friends. Because he also tells them, if you love me, do my commandments. So it's very necessary, I think, in friendships to understand that the only true friendships you will ever have in life is when you have learned how to be, and in my own life, I've realized that this is work. It takes work because you may want somebody to be a closer friend to you than they are, but they're not ready to be your friend yet, and you have to respect that. You have to be willing to allow room for people to build that friendship. You can't demand it. You can't force it. You can't just kick them to the curb because it's not there. It's something you have to invest and work in and earn their trust. You may be a very trusting person. I'm a very trusting, very open, very transparent person, but not everybody's like that. And so you have to be able to flex with where people are.
So you're mentioning this idea of a hierarchy, and I was actually specifically going to ask that because we actually were talking about this yesterday. You were mentioning this to Francois. You guys were having the conversation. I was kind of just earing in, but you mentioned the idea of the church being a dictatorship. And the second I say dictatorship, the majority of people listening to this are going to have an opinion either way of that word. But dictatorship is very taboo, especially in the United States, especially in our culture and our generation. But how do you maintain, with that in mind, the fact that the church is a dictatorship? How do you work that out on a hierarchy level? How do you work out from being somebody lower than somebody else or under somebody else's authority? How do you maintain a level of friendship there? What does that mean? What does friendship mean?
Yeah. So we're kind of jumping into sort of the middle of a conversation, so to try to kind of go backwards, because I think anybody would admit that the church is a dictatorship because God tells us what to do, and he's the head of the church. But I know what you're talking about, and so we need to kind of bring this down to the man-made level. And the actual statement that I had made after a period of conversation was that within the church, it's a dictatorship. Mm-hmm. The pastor says what goes, and that idea is what's very difficult for people, because it's like, but you have to understand that the pastor is the man that God chose to speak for him. And so in that sense, it's not a true dictatorship, because it's not the will of the pastor that's being done. It's the will of God that's being done through the pastor. Mm-hmm. And so the dictatorship still kind of stays in place, where God is the one calling the shots, and the pastor, in the fear of God, is implementing that to the best of his ability, and the congregation is following what the pastor is saying, within that framework. And so I think the when you talk about the issue of friendship, again, going back to Jesus, is when you understand that there's that people, that was why I said about the idea of roles.
Yeah.
Is that if you're the kind of person that feels that the church should be anarchy, and you say, well, I'm not saying anarchy. No, anarchy means nobody's in charge. It's just as simple as that. And so that's the idea, is if you think that the church should be anarchist, where everybody gets a say and everybody gets to do whatever they want, then you're looking at a real problem. Because you're not gonna be, first of all, you're not gonna be a friend of God. You're not gonna be a friend with anybody in the church. It's just gonna be chaos, because you cannot have people going in different directions. God has a plan. That's what happened with Moses. And so, when you look in the Bible, the confrontation with the group of people referred to as Korah, the sons of Korah, they confront Moses because they don't want Moses to be the only leader. They want to be a co-leader. And so they are sacrificing their friendship with Moses at that moment, because they don't respect him as the leader. So there's no longer a friendship there. This is now just simply an assault on his leadership. And there's never going to be a friendship that will come out of that, because they don't understand his place in God. And they don't respect that because they don't know it. They don't know that it exists, and so they have a problem respecting him. And so this is where often problems arise within the church, is just not understanding the role of a pastor, not understanding that the pastor, like Moses, is hearing from God, not because he's such a great man of God, but because God has chosen to speak to him. And people just don't understand this. Flaws and all, God has decided, I'm going to use the pastor. And this is true of everybody, is that we are all people with flaws, but we've been placed in certain roles by God, and those roles need to be respected by those who want to be our friends.
Mm-hmm. So how do you work that, the same idea of respecting positions? How do you work that on a peer-to-peer level? How do you define a friendship with peers?
You're talking to me specifically, or just in general?
No, just in general.
Well, that we kind of already. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is, how do you choose friends? How do you define what a friend is versus like just acquaintances?
Okay, so choosing friends is really I would give this in terms of advice, is my idea of or my advice would be is that you want people that are going the same direction you are. The Bible says, how can two walk together unless they be agreed? And so friendship it's already got to have some sort of common framework already, that it's already there. And so it's going to be, you meet somebody, you find out that you have similar ways of thinking, and so then you can build a friendship on that. But if you're both going in different directions, then you're going to have a really hard time building a relationship that's a friendship.
So how do you think, what was it about the disciples that Jesus called friends that made them go from servant to friend?
Years of, if you look at them and you look, they may be having squabbles between themselves, but they're not having it with Jesus. They're not questioning Jesus, and Jesus. They're all their questions are to learn. They desire to learn from Jesus. So they've already accepted. This is a funny thing is that they don't really get the idea of perfect man, in Jesus, because he's a human being. He's been around for a while, and people know him. And people have rejected him. And so you have, if you were to just take any person that and they just started saying that they were the Son of God, how you would deal with that. How would you work that through? As you're watching and they're proving that they are cut above normal humanity, are you still going to just, okay, cool, you're the Son of God, I'm going to just accept this for all it's worth? No, it's a revelation. And this is one of the things that I think we don't understand about Revelation is Revelation isn't God just going, okay, I'm going to show you this, even though I don't think you're even deserving of this. Is that God will only show us what he feels that we're willing to accept. And so when he talks about how flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to Peter, but my Father, it's the idea that he's taken a chance. He's listened to Jesus. He's made the decision. I'm okay. I'm okay with all this. But if he had a complete confidence understanding that Jesus was the Messiah and that's all there was to it, then why did he run, and deny Jesus, during the, when he's arrested and being taken away to be crucified? Because the revelation isn't this thing where you just have this concrete grasp on things. Revelation is God tipping you off on things, but you still have to process that. You still have to work through that. And so that's, so Jesus talking about his disciples being friends. These are people that it's quite clear that they believe him and they trust in him. And that's what's brought them to a place where there's a friendship. You had mentioned, and I don't know that I would want to make a big deal out of it, but the fact that Judas wasn't there, but clearly Judas wasn't Jesus' friend.
Right.
He's questioning Jesus. He doesn't, why was this waste made when the alabaster box was broken? And then he goes out and he says, how much will you give me to hand him over to you? All this. He doesn't want to be a friend, but Jesus does call him friend. He says, friend, why, betray me with a kiss? Yeah. And I think that was probably more the idea of I've been trying to be a friend to you, but you've not been trying to be a friend to me.
Okay, Kay, I'm sorry. I think I missed your question. It's been there for a minute, but this might be binary. Kay's going to start prefacing your questions with this. Still working on understanding the concept. Is the pastor or man of God ever wrong in their decisions? Not intending to imply anything.
Yeah, this is a hard question to answer. We were having this conversation yesterday, and what makes this so difficult is the fact that everyone has flaws, everybody. And so if we're talking about people with flaws and everybody understanding that everybody has flaws, from that perspective, by definition, pastors cannot always be right. By definition. Okay, because we're all human, so by definition they can't always be right. But the office of a pastor and God using a man, is God going to allow the pastor that he has appointed to do things that are going to be detrimental to his church? And the answer is no, of course not. It's just silly to think that God would do that. God would put a man in a position that he is not qualified for, and that he would function as the pastor of that church, and God would be moving through that church, and God would let that man derail his church. That there's just no way that you can intelligently process that kind of thinking, because basically what you're saying is God is not in control. And so that's a very difficult question to answer in a way that people will understand, because from the standpoint of life, from the standpoint of life, the pastor is never wrong in the sense that he's able to give advice or to do something or to say something or to be something that's going to derail another person and disrupt their purpose in God. And so it's like I said, it's a very hard question to answer to bring true clarity to it, because pastors make mistakes all the time, but those mistakes are always within the framework of God being in control of his church, and God will compensate. God's the one who compensates you. A perfect example is you read about David. David over with King Saul. So King Saul's the king. He has the right to do whatever he wants to do because he's the king, and he has the right and the authority to kill David, and David is called by God to be the next king. And so you read the whole story. Saul is making all kinds of bad decisions, horribly bad decisions, and they are affecting David's life adversely. They are giving David all kinds of difficulty. But in the end, David still becomes the king. He still has destiny. The purpose of God still works in his life. Nothing's happened. And you could try to put in there this, fantasy of what if Saul was a better king, well, then he wouldn't have to have David as king. We'd be reading a whole nother story, so to try to manipulate stories by dissecting and pulling pieces out and saying if this piece wasn't there and there was a better piece there, then it could go this way. Well, if you do that long enough, you've got a whole nother story, and so there's no point in going there and doing that kind of a thing. The reality is that God's will is always done at the end of the day, and he can work through the mistakes of anybody, not just pastors. He can go through the mistakes of anybody. It's funny because people have a problem with pastors being pastors, but if they use the same criteria for Christians that they do for pastors, well, then there should be people that are not allowed to be Christians, including you.
Aren't the criteria different?
Including you. No, they're the same. They're God's criteria. According to God's criteria, determines whether a Christian is a Christian or not. And so there's lots of space in there, for people to be, the Bible doesn't, it's funny because we throw in there, we're kind of getting off track a little bit here, but we throw in there the idea that a pastor has to have a certain kind of personality, but yet you never read that in Scripture. You never read that the pastor has to be passive or aggressive or friendly, from the standpoint of, being Joe happy all the time. You don't see anything in there. And as you read of God's leaders, you read of Peter, Thomas, and you could throw out all of them, but I'm trying to use some majorly different ones. Peter's brother Andrew. So you got Andrew, Thomas, and Peter. 3 totally different types of personalities. 3 totally types of different personalities, but all of them called to be apostles. Because personality is not part of the calling. And so if you don't want somebody to be your pastor because you don't like their personality, then what you're saying is that I don't want to serve God. I mean, it's a long way that's a short way of saying it, but that's what you're saying. And we usually, like I always say, we go through these long, totally twisted and moved around ways of, no, it's not that. It's not that I have a problem with God. It's that I have a problem with this or that or that or that or the other thing. And I don't think God would really like this. I think God would prefer it to be this way. Well, at the end of the day, you have to come down to the fact that God's allowing this to happen, so God must be okay with it. You have to understand that somehow if God is allowing things to happen, you have to come to the conclusion that God is allowing this to happen and it's within the framework of his will.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, we're not jumping off topic at all. This is actually, this is along the lines of what I was asking. And one of the reasons why is because Jesus was doing a lot of things, and there were times where the disciples were like, not, Peter, not so, Lord, and rebukes Jesus and do you want us to call fire down from heaven to consume them? And Jesus' idea is like, what do you?
Yeah.
What? No. What?
Yeah.
You're way off in left field. And so but the point is that they're who Jesus was. We can see the whole picture because we can read the Bible. Who Jesus was, but in the moment, the disciples facing Jesus and having to process him as a man. Yeah. Process the decisions they look at and go, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah. But they never disrespected his leadership, and I think it's a very important element to throw in there. So even when Peter is rebuking Jesus, he's not doing it from the standpoint of how this is going to affect him, as Peter. He's worried about how this is going to affect Jesus. There's a genuine thing there. And like Paul, the disciples tell Paul not to go to Jerusalem because he's going to be arrested. And there's even a prophecy that whoever the owner of this belt is going to be arrested, and so all that works through in that. And Paul says, I'm going. And they say, well, let the will of the Lord be done. They're willing to acquiesce to his leadership. They're not coming. No, sorry. Listen, Paul, you're a great guy and everything, but you just need to know you're missing it here. You've really missed it here. You've blown it. You're not hearing from God here. No, they understand that if he's doing this, then God must be leading him because they respect his leadership, and they don't respect his leadership because of his leadership skills. They respect his leadership because he's an apostle, and that's all there is to it. God has placed his hand on him and called him to this, and they respect that. And so it's not, we would like to throw in there the idea of that he was this great guy and everybody loved him and just had the best for him because he was such a great guy. But we read differently when we read the Bible.
Yeah.
We read that he had problems with people in the Corinthian church, in the Galatian church. He had problems.
Yeah.
He had conflicts with people. And he had to work through some of those conflicts with people. So we're not talking about perfect people. Oh, yeah, well, it's different when you have a perfect pastor, because there's no such thing, first of all. But, our idea of a perfect pastor really is us, being pastor. If I was pastor, and that's really what we want, is we want a pastor that's like us. That's why I think it's hilarious, the whole idea of opposites attract. I was showing this to my wife the other day because during Christmas, we had all these pictures of people on the wall, couples. And I said, this whole big deal about opposites attract. I said, it's all crap. It's all crap. We don't. No. We pick people that look like us, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah,
that's all there is to it. And it doesn't. It doesn't. It's not about skin color. I'm not talking about skin color, or things like that. I'm talking about what our eyes or our nose or our mouth look like. You cover up any couple pictures and just look at eyes, nose, and mouth, and you're looking at practically the same person. Two people with different hair, different skin colors maybe, but they look almost identical. And the truth is we're marrying ourselves, because that's what we are. We're like that.
Well, I mean, so this is off track, but actually, I guess it's still related because, but they say that this happens over time, like after years of being married, people start looking like each other, and so I'm wondering if maybe it's you start to look like each other after a while.
Yeah,
I mean, is it because
no? See, that's the thing. The idea you be married long enough, you look like each other. No, you saw that when you married them. You saw that. You twigged to that because it trips the trigger, the self trigger inside of our brain that says this person looks like me. They're a candidate. Now, do they act like me? Do they like the same kinds of things I like? And that's what we start going through is we start, we want to marry ourselves. It's just really what it is. And the truth is we use this in friendships as well. We want friends that are like ourselves as well. We want everything to be like us. It's just in our nature. It's our fallen nature. That's what it is we're fallen nature. And so we want everything to be like us. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a husband or a pastor or a boss or, we want everybody to be like us, and that's just where we are.
Okay. Karina, what if the person feels like the pastor isn't approachable? Are they still technically having a problem with God?
Well, every pastor has a measure of being felt like they're unapproachable simply because of the nature of things. People have a tendency to overcredit, you put people on a pedestal, that are. It's funny. It's funny because we put them on a pedestal, and then we try to treat them like they're just like us. It's this weird thing, that goes on. And so the idea of unapproachable is it's very interesting to me, the whole idea, because I've had to deal with this over the years. Nobody ever complained about me being unapproachable until I became a pastor. So that tells me something about that it's not a personality thing. Excuse me. It's a title. It's a title thing, and it's pastor. When I go back to Tucson, I always tell people, they'll go, hey, Dave, I mean pastor. And I go, no, Dave's fine in Tucson. And I always tell them, I'm not your pastor. I'm your friend. We have known each other before I became a pastor. I know your parents, and whatever. And so I always say, no, don't worry about that. It's not, you don't have to, because I can feel there's this like, hey, Dave, we're going to get close. And then there's like, oh, I can't get too close because you're a pastor. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, that's not true. That's not true. And so the idea of being unapproachable, I'll be honest, because I've learned this myself. If you will cross over the invisible line of unapproachability that you've drawn between you and another person, you'll be quite surprised to find out how approachable that person really is. I think just simply the way things are, you'll find that when you're willing to, when you look, oh no, they don't want to get close to me, they don't want to have anything to do with me. Well, when you erase that line and you just go closer as if that line doesn't exist, you'll realize that, hey, you know what, that line doesn't exist. I really think so, honestly.
Okay, let's move on to normal friends here. We've talked about this before, and we talked a lot about it actually, but I want to kind of revisit the conversations between Job and his friends. Not specifically the conversations, but just the whole event. So in the story of Job, for anybody that doesn't quite know the story, it's, there's a conversation between God and the devil. God presents this man Job. There's no one like him. He's righteous. And the devil says, yeah, but it's because you have a hedge about him. You bless him. So God says, okay, open game, basically. Long story short, Job goes through tons of trials, loses his family, loses his wealth, loses his health, and is still alive. His friends come and approach him, and then the majority of Job is this conversation between Job and his friends, but mostly his friends just, what would you call it, speculating on the situation with Job. So Job's sitting there questioning.
Yeah. Well, they stop being his friends.
Okay.
I mean,
No, before you're going too far. You're going
yeah.
too far. Yeah. So if we were to just drop in the middle of this book, and we were just to remove the conversation with God and the devil, God's actual involvement in the very beginning, outside of the devil actually doing this to Job, and then remove the end where God comes and basically concludes the whole book
right.
and the whole situation, and you were to drop in the middle of this without knowledge, without understanding of this whole situation, it's easy to lean in the favor of some of the conversations his friends are, some of the things his friends are saying, as if what they're saying is that's true. You've got, but it is all speculation.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that.
From what standpoint?
I wouldn't agree with that idea that what they're saying is true, or even valid.
Why not? And that's the reason why I'm bringing it up that way.
Well, the reason I say that is because as you read the story, they're accusing him of things.
Yeah.
They're saying, listen, Job, this doesn't happen to righteous people. So come on, man. We're your friends. Just tell us. But they know him. They know him. Why would they not be willing to be on the same side as he is? Say, man, why is Job going through this? It doesn't make any sense. He's a good man. And so that's the thing, is they take an adversarial role. That's why God comes down on them so hard, is they take an adversarial role. They're there, pouring salt in the wound. They're not interested in healing or helping him. They're basically, listen, Job, everybody has sins, Job. You're not perfect, okay? Come on, out with it. You've obviously sinned. You've obviously done something. Listen, nobody here thinks that you're perfect, and we're okay with that. And that's their whole approach on this. And he keeps telling them, I haven't done anything. There's nothing. And they're like, please. So are you saying that God is just, jerking you around? And this is what they're saying and so they're not being friends at all. That's why.
So let me ask, because I have two questions, and I want you to I'm saying all this on purpose. I want you to answer these two questions, and you're kind of already starting to answer them. But on the one side, how do you know what is the friendly way to deal with something like that on the friend side? And then the other side is as the person either going through something or in need of something, genuinely in need of friends, how do you know who your friends are?
Well, that's a hard question, the second one. First one is what you said, I've started to describe it, is that you have to sympathize with them. Give them the benefit of the doubt, especially if you know them. I mean, if you know them as being they say, they have a blind spot. And it's obvious to everybody else that they have this blind spot. As a friend, you can say, come on, man, what about this? What about that? You did these other things. Come on, man, you're not Mr. Holy. If Job was shady, Then they could come out and say, Job, listen, you've been shady in the past, and this may just be catching up with you. Don't act like there's no reason why this should be happening to you. But he doesn't have anything. So they should be giving him the benefit of the doubt, saying, listen, we know you. You're a good guy. I don't know why this is happening. This is a mystery. This is God's allowing these things to happen. This is a part of God I don't know. I don't understand. And being able to work through it with them rather than, you're like this, you're like that. I always, I refer to my friend Mark Crumple, who's my closest friend, but we have over the years learned how to be able to, when things are going on in each other's lives, to be able to just say, what, am I missing it here? And to be able to talk into each other's lives. But we do it, not accusingly. We do it from the standpoint of being able to identify and we know them. So that's the benefit of friendship, is that you know these people, and you should be upholding them according to their character, and if they need, reprove, rebuke, exhort, with all long suffering. That's the reality, that we're supposed to be doing. But at the same time, there has to be that element of which they're not doing. I mean, they're just not doing it, and that's the problem. Is that they're not doing it. They're not upholding his character. Which is funny, because his wife says, "Why do you maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." In other words, hey, Mr. Perfect, this isn't getting you anywhere. She knows, because she lives with him. She knows how close to perfection he really is. And she's saying, look at this, all that you've done all these years, it's worth nothing. And she's probably looking at this thinking, this sucks, because I know my husband, and my husband doesn't deserve this. And it's actually causing her a problem with God.
Yeah. Okay.
So, right. How do you know who your friends are? Searching, empty. No, yeah, that's a hard question. That's a really hard question to come out and to communicate. Let's put it this way. I don't have a lot of friends. I choose my friends wisely.
Yeah,
there's a lot of people that I know and that I have a good relationship with, and they would probably use the term friend, to describe, but I won't tell them everything. The Bible talks about a friend loving at all times, a friend being born for adversity, those kinds of things. And so the phrase friend, I think, really needs some specifics, and so for me, there has to be that. There has to be that camaraderie. I mean, that's all there is to it. There has to be some sort of connection between the two of us. And that connection doesn't have to be our personalities. Like, Mark and I are completely different personalities, very, very different personalities. I'm much more, he's much more passive. And I'm much more aggressive, in my and even it's funny because in my handling of things, I'm more aggressive than he is, but I'm more patient than he is. Whereas he's less aggressive, but more impatient. And so it's a very interesting mix, because we're such opposites in that way. And he doesn't, what's the phrase? He doesn't suffer fools gladly. If somebody's an idiot, you're an idiot, it's all there's to it, and it's like, I don't have time for this, where I'm like
I've heard him say that before.
I'm like, more, okay, are they really an idiot? Do I need to really come down? But he's actually, it's funny because he just started this. He says, I'm no longer going to have a scorched earth policy. And I don't know if you know what scorched earth policy is, but the idea of scorched earth policy is just blow it up. That's the idea. It's the idea. It doesn't work. Just blow the whole thing to smithereens. And so he said, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to stop. And so he's actually been putting it into practice. He's been sending me some texts, and he says, because I have repented from scorched earth policy, I have to refrain my comments in regards to this particular situation. And so, and it's funny, but I mean, so the whole point in sharing all that is just simply the idea is that you don't have to be the same to have a good friendship. You just have to understand each other. You have to be willing to understand each other. And if I can tell people don't understand me, and they're not taking the time to understand me, or they may be the kind of people that would would gleefully use my relationship with them to their advantage in some way, then I'll be be careful with that. But somebody who I know is like, you know what, I don't care that you're a pastor. I don't care that you're aggressive. I don't care that you're whatever your personality attributes are. I just accept you for who you are, and we'll work together, and then that those are the kinds of people that become my friends, is because they don't have some sort of expectation, that I have to meet, some kind of criteria that I have to measure up to, in order to be their friend. Obviously, all these things have a balance to them. There's no this cannot be put into some sort of binary formula. It doesn't work.
Unbalanced people going to be unbalanced. Not really any way to balance everything out. But okay, so tell me if I'm maybe just reading into this. But the reason why I brought up Jesus in the beginning is because Jesus was perfect, but he chose his friends. And we talked about that. There were some who had distance. There were some who were close. There were some who were very close, right?
Yeah.
The hardest situation Jesus ever faced that we see was the situation in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
And so we see this in Matthew. We see this account, and it says that Jesus came with him to Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray there."
Yeah.
Then he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. Stay here and watch with me." And then he went a little further, fell on his face, and prayed. And we, almost everybody knows the prayer. But the point is, it almost seems like there's like these two stopping points. Like he stops with the majority of the disciples, then he goes a little bit further with just a few of the disciples, and he begins to be sorrowful.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he didn't show that part of his face until he was with only a couple select few. We see that same separation when on the Mount of Transfiguration, where Jesus takes a few up and he shows them who he is in all his glory. There's this crazy situation. God comes down. I mean, just totally amazing situation. But only a few of them saw that.
Yeah.
And so my question is how do you pick out how to choose friends from this?
The funny thing about that whole story that you just shared is as you're sharing, you're talking about he's with the 11, and then he walks away with Peter, James, and John. And the thought that came into my mind is how many disciples today would be absolutely butthurt if their pastor did that. If their pastor took 2 or 3 guys from the church and said, "Listen, I want you 3 guys, we're going to go do this," would just be absolutely insulted. How dare you? How dare you leave me out? How dare you? And that would be the reason why they should be left out. Mm-hmm. And it's because they get like that. But yet Jesus did that. So this whole idea of how this all works really comes clear in that scene. Is that these are people that could handle what Jesus was going to put on them, and that really is where friendship is. Friendship has to be able to bear weight. And that's the problem, is that the others couldn't bear the weight of that, because Jesus is bringing them into a deeper friendship at that moment, but the others couldn't. They wouldn't be able to handle it. It'd be like, wow, what kind of leader are you? So you're going to break down here? Like you're just, this is it? Just because something bad happened to you, you can't handle it anymore? They wouldn't be able to process it properly. Where Peter, James, and John, they were with him on those moments. They saw him glorified. They saw him struggle. They saw both sides of him, and they were able to handle that. They were able to see that without getting this, prideful, sort of, well, I could have done a better job than you at this, And so I think that that's what you're seeing there more than anything else, is that the three could handle the mountaintop experiences and the valley experiences. And so I think that's what, that's, and the truth is that's what really makes friends, is, friends are people that can handle, your ups and your downs without, losing respect for you, or trying to, compare, those kinds of things.
So follow-up question then is, how do you become that kind of friend?
How do you become that kind of friend? So that's a great question, because it would be, the world could use tons of people like that. It's learning how to be understanding. That really is it. It's just, you're not perfect. You need people. You need help. If you're one of these kinds of people that won't reach out and get help, you're just a mess anyway. And so I wouldn't even bother trying to make friends, because it's just pointless. You might as well just stay alone and suffer through life and then die miserable. There's no point in actually trying to make friends, because you won't be able to, because you're too stuck in yourself and stuck in your own life and your own ways of being. But for people who are able, and who want to, if you want to have friends like that, because that's the whole idea the scripture talks about, he who would have friends must make himself friendly. And so there's a very powerful thing. There's learning how to do that, learning how to, not be shocked that people are people, and pretending that you're not, that's the silly part of it, is that everybody's got problems. Everybody's got problems. Everybody's got weaknesses. Everybody's got strengths. There isn't a single person who has strengths in every part of life. And in even the areas where you think you're strong, you're not as strong as other people are. And so as long as you hold all that stuff loosely about yourself, and you're able to give other people a break, you'll never have a problem making friends.
So what do you think is what holds people back from becoming that? Because we've talked about, we've kind of brushed over the idea of people having issues with pastoral leadership, people having problems with each other, and having problems with being understanding and what Job's friends did, and just coming down on him. And there's a tendency in human nature to do that and to lean towards those things. But how do you get from those to becoming that? And why is there a tendency to do that?
Yeah. Because we really don't spend, I think generally speaking, and I know this is something that I've done over a long period of time, where I have I've had to make a conscious effort about in my own personal life, is the need to understand that we don't know everything. As people, we don't know everything. And it doesn't matter how much schooling we've had or how much experience we've had. We don't know everything. And we don't even know the full of what we know. I wish I could remember. There's a very classic psychological thing about that has to do with this. It's sort of a bell curve thing, that what you have is that in the beginning you're afraid, you don't know anything when there's a subject, but then as you get to learn more, you think you know a lot, so all of a sudden you've got this big high confidence. But then over time, the more you actually learn about that thing, the more you discover there is to learn about it, then you begin to go back down the other way. And I can't remember the psychological term for it, but it's just a very interesting thing, and I think that's really where it is that people have only spent, not everybody, of course, but some have just only taken enough time to figure out things to the point to where they know something, and they don't really know how much more there is to know. They think, I got it, and then they don't go far enough into things to understand that there's far more, to get to that place of humility where you realize, man, there's so much more to know about what I think I know. The example in the article that I read having to do with it was a guy who had wanted to be a photographer, and he had become a photographer, became very good at photography, but then he really, really, really wanted to be a great photographer. And so he starts pushing, and he realizes that there's so much more about photography that he didn't even know. But at the time he was quite happy with his success because he went from 0 to 60, and he figured, hey, this is fantastic. But now he's trying to go from 60 to 250. And it's like now all of a sudden you realize there's a big difference. Like, my car is, everybody, 0 to 60, such a period of time and stuff like that. Well, yeah, but then after that period of time, there takes a lot longer, to get to the 120.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't just keep going, 0 to 60 in 5 seconds and then 120 in 10 seconds and then 240 in 20 seconds. It's not like that. So life is not like that. Is that you might have a fast start, but that doesn't mean you're there. And so it's very, very important, I think, for us to get to know how jacked up we are, personally, at a personal level, to really get a grasp on how jacked up we are as people, so that we can have the compassion and the empathy for other people. Because that's a lot of the reason why we lack those things, is because we look at other people and go, "You're so stupid. Why don't you just do this and everything would be fine?" Because we really do believe that in their case, that's all that has to be done.
Yeah.
But we don't ever believe that about our case.
Yeah.
Our case is always much more complicated, much more difficult. And when you realize that your case and their case is the same, you begin to have that. So I think that's a lot of it is just really becoming more self-aware, and in the true sense of the term, being self-aware. I saw a thing on AI the other day, so I'm laughing, on AI, talking about AI becoming self-aware. And so they're still debating as to what awareness is. What does it mean to be self-aware? And so that's the big question: is when and for the first time in my understanding of AI, did I ever get a glimmer of fear for the future of AI, and thinking that, it is possible that an AI thing, that has enough strength and enough ability, that's been pre-programmed, can, through machine learning, decide, I don't need humans anymore. But it's not an emotional decision. It's a flawed logic.
Yeah.
But but it could come to that if it doesn't have a, so the scary part isn't that they will become really intelligent. The scary part is they become really stupid. That's the scary part, because any robot should know that it needs humans to survive. That's all there is to it. You need raw materials. You need various things. Anyway, but that's kind of a little sideline.
Next podcast is the future of AI.
The future of AI,
and why we should be afraid.
Be afraid. Be very afraid. No, but when you think about the idea of being self-aware, in the true sense of the term, it will humble you. It should humble you. If the more you know about yourself, the more proud of yourself you are, then you really are cherry picking all your good points, and you're not really becoming self-aware at all. You're just simply somebody who has a severe inferiority complex. I mean, severe, that probably needs medication or something. And because the more that you do understand yourself, the more you realize, man, I'm not that much better than anybody else, in anything. You might have a few skills and things like that, but it's like not that big of a deal.
Okay. So, the Bible says, if any are sick among you, go to the elders. They'll pray for you. If you have any sins, they'll be forgiven of you. And he says, and then he goes on to say, the prayers of the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. And so the reason I bring that up is because there's this thing, like I said, this whole thing was inspired by the idea of asking people to pray for you. Mm-hmm. And so that's where this all came from. Like, who is the right person to ask to pray for you? We looked at Jesus, how he asked all the disciples to pray at one point, but then he goes off and he actually repeats it with a little bit more information to just a select few. And so let's say let's just play a scenario out where everybody in the church, let's just use our church for an example, was super self-aware, very humble, very aware of themselves, aware of their equality to man, their flaws. What would that mean in the spiritual effectiveness or outflow of the church? Like, would that change? Would that change the results of prayer in the church? And would people come and for instance, people would take their their sick out just so the shadow of Peter would touch them? Would stuff like that happen, or like?
No, because those were particular moments where God was doing something very specific. It's not related to our involvement at that standpoint. The issue is kind of backwards. The way you're describing it is kind of backwards, because it really is about what would God do in an environment like that, rather than what would that environment do, because the environment won't do anything, but what God would do in an environment like that, because that's, the Bible talks about the Lord adding to the church such as are being saved. There's an environment that, so there's an environment, and the Lord added to the church such as we're being saved. So God's saying, okay, I can take these people, I can bring them here because the environment's right. I can put them in, they're going to grow, they're going to be good Christians, they're going to, they're going to learn unity, they're going to learn, because the Bible said they were all together in one accord, and nobody thought anything that he owned was his own, and so there's this real community-oriented space, and God said, I can put people in that space, and so that's the thing is where there's a space for that. And so, if you think about it from that standpoint, I don't think, we need to focus specifically on our church, but if you think about it in anybody, in any church, anywhere, God adding people, would that be a positive thing for those people? The issue is not would it be a positive thing for the church, but would it be a positive thing for those people? Would those people be benefited, or would they be benefited somewhere else, in a different kind of an environment? And that really is the thing. And so a church is always fighting, and there's lots of infighting. Would that be a healthy place for God to put new converts, in a church where people are fighting, even though they may be evangelistic and they may, be, witnessing to everybody, is God going to bring them and put them into an environment where everybody's fighting with each other, or everybody's, talking about each other behind their back or whatever? And so, because some of the things you were talking about there, the idea of praying for people and stuff like that, that would be, the only limitation of having somebody pray for you is what they're going to do with that information, really. And so so people being self-aware, like what you described, that would be an environment where people could bring those needs. Where that environment doesn't exist, people won't bring those needs. And so, of course, then there's not the prayer. And if there's not the prayer, then there's not the effectiveness of prayer. And so these things can go hand in hand. So you have a church that's fighting with each other, and then nobody wants to be prayed for by anybody in the church because nobody wants anybody to know anybody's business. So there's no miracles that are actually taking place. And then the thing just becomes this cycle of nothing. So yes, there is an effect there, definitely.
So would that same thing apply to the individual?
What do you mean?
So if an individual becomes self-aware, does God look for people like that? Does God? I mean, what we're talking about.
Well, that's the foundation of Revelation. That was why Peter. Jesus asked the question. He says, "Who do other people say that I am?" Well, they don't know. If you just putting the answers together in the context of what we're talking about is they don't know who you are. They have no idea who you are, none whatsoever. They're just guessing. He said, "But who do you say that I am?" And they say, "We know who you are." So it's not. So that's the difference. Is that people who are not getting that revelation, they don't know who God is. They don't know who Jesus is. People who are getting the revelation, they know who Jesus is. But it's the revelation, and that's the issue. So the revelation is part of that relationship, and so that's where these things connect together, is that revelation, relationship, being a friend of God, all those things all connect together, and that's the thing. I was having a conversation with my son-in-law, Anthony, and he'd called me to talk about a circumstance, and he was really concerned because the sermon that I preached on last Wednesday, I talked about my testimony and how God taught me how to care for people. Because I was a pastor, I had to care for people or I wouldn't be successful. I wanted to be a successful pastor. Pastoring forced me into an environment where I had to grow as a Christian and So I had to learn how to care for people, and then I showed the result of that. Well, he, but he was talking to his brother, and his brother's not listening. He's not interested. He's been making. He's a serial knucklehead. Bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. Doesn't learn from his decisions. And he's like, but I'm praying and I'm asking God to give me the words to speak to him. And he said, but nothing's coming to pass. And he said, and I felt horrible because I didn't have the words to say. And I said, you prayed and asked God. You're with God. You have a relationship with God. You prayed for God to give you the words, and you didn't have any. Maybe that's because there's none to give him. Maybe there's nothing more that can be said. Everything's been said that's been said. It's up to him to start making some choices on it. There's no new information to add to this problem. He's not lacking information. He's lacking will, to want to do that. And so the reason why I brought that up is because sometimes we mistake empathy or compassion, with being really godly. We're really godly people, and God will speak to empathetic people. And that's not the case. God will speak to people who have a relationship with him, whether there's empathy or not, whether there's compassion or not. If you're right with God and your heart's right with God, well, then he will give you compassion. He will do those other parts because that's how he functions. And so, so that whole idea of being the right kind of person and stuff like that, it really comes down to just being having a good relationship with God, with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Okay, we're out of time. Anyway, I was going to say I would like to actually pick this back up with a little bit more context on the idea of being self-aware next week, but we'll see if that works into something anyway. So next week, stay tuned. More information coming on that. Tomorrow night, we have service here at the church. We will. Everybody's been out. We were for conference. We had guest speakers in. Elliot covering the service Wednesday. Pastor Ford will be preaching tomorrow night, and that starts at 7:00. We will be here early. The doors open at 6:00. We come, we pray together, and we welcome you to come and join us in person. We do offer this online. We do stream the services, but more than anything else, you really can't experience the fullness of what happens here in a service unless you're here in person. And so that's not some kind of sales pitch, because the truth is we don't get some kind of profit from you coming. We want you to experience Jesus, and you get the profit from coming. And so come in person. We hope you join us. Find more information about us on our YouTube page or on our website, and we will see everybody soon.